And I just want to welcome everyone this morning to our ASCILITE live webinar, part 2 of our special edition around the COVID-19 response and institutions dealing with the crisis. Today's presentation, Crisis and Technology Enhanced Learning Responses from the ASCILITE community, features members from our special interest groups. And so joining us, we've got Dr. Henk Huijser, Senior Lecturer, Curriculum and Learning Designer from Queensland University of Technology, Mrs. Hazel Jones, Learning and Teaching Consultant from Griffith University, Wendy Taleo, who is a learning developer and trainer at Charles Darwin University, and Mrs. Audrea Warner, who is the Professional Teaching Fellow, Management and Marketing, University of Auckland. And so we've got sort of a list of questions we're going to work through today about how each of these groups are both dealing with the crisis and what part they can play in assisting, each of the roles can play in assisting in institutions in the COVID-19 response. So what we wanted to do, because the business analytics SIG is a little bit different, the business education SIG is a little bit different than the other ASCILITE SIGs, as it is discipline-based and focused on learning within a discipline. We thought we'd ask Audrea to kick us off to talk about, just to provide context, what are some of the challenges in her discipline and at the institution that COVID-19 has created. So I'm going to turn it over to Audrea first.
Hi, thanks everyone, and thank you, David. Well, talking about it from very much a context of New Zealand and talking about it from the University of Auckland's perspective, we are the largest tertiary institution in New Zealand, and for us it's been huge. Over the last probably good 2 to 3 weeks, we've been having discussions about, would there be a lockdown in New Zealand? What would that entail? So we were mentally kind of preparing. However, for many of us, and for one of the courses that I was involved in, is a simulation which runs with students getting into teams, and then basically they run a cycle company over a 10-week period. We actually had to decide that that wasn't going to be something that was going to be viable or something that we could do. The rationale behind that was a number of things. We found that we were having our predominant demographics of our students are all international students, and it's one of the core papers that they do when they actually begin within our master's program. And it would mean that A, they didn't know anyone, B, that they were really going into really unfamiliar territory. We weren't going to provide with them with any kind of orientation. There was none of that engagement that normally is there as a stepping stone before you actually even get into the academic stuff that we teach and do. So all of that was kind of in the background. What it has also meant for a lot of my colleagues and myself is that on Sunday of last week, we got told all of that was being canned, and we'd started to prepare for it. All of that was going to have to be put aside. We weren't going to take in a new intake of master's students, and instead we were all going to be on different courses. So we have been scrambling for the last 7 days. However, in saying that, as an institution, we've got a new Vice-Chancellor. The transparency and communication that's been given via upper management has been phenomenal, especially normally knowing how long things normally get to us in terms of communication and finding out stuff. She's actually had a Zoom meeting yesterday with everyone in the university and really had a panel there who was very much open about what are the things that we're trying to do and how does that going to affect us in terms of how we're going to be teaching and doing things like our assessments and so forth. It's a huge learning curve. That's all I can say. The last 7 days, it's a good 14, 15 hours a day of really trying to grapple and get around how am I going to turn these courses into online delivery and make sure that we don't lose student engagement. A lot of my peers have decided to do different things with the LMS that we use, which is Canvas, and then use things like Zoom. I wanted to have things like Zoom in my own courses for the reason that that face-to-face communication, a lot of us are, well, all of us are in lockdown here in New Zealand. It means that our students are also stuck in small confined apartments or wherever they may be, halls of residence. And it means that they are very much needing that engagement and contact. And I feel that that's really important as well for them as well as for us. So in terms of that, trying to make sure we look at the different avenues that are available in terms of different tools that we can use, and then making sure that I've got really clear instructions for my students in terms of how they are actually going to use this new tool that they may not have used before, and etiquette. One of the funny things was we've all been using Zoom now. Zoom's kind of become common language in the last sort of 2-3 weeks for me anyway. But just that etiquette, I'm still learning etiquette. And if I'm going to be using that with students, I'm actually trialing it out with groups of students over the next week just to get those kinks out of the way, things that I might be doing wrong as a host, things that they need to know as student participants as well in those kind of spaces. So it's that kind of thing that's for us as business educators has been kind of those stepping stones and learning milestones along this kind of journey. One of the other things that we have is daily meetings, whereby all the staff in the area that I'm in, called the Graduate School of Management, we kind of liaise with one another and say things or raise up issues such as things like analytics. What are we going to do in terms of monitoring these students? We've got international students. Again, like I stated before, that's our large body of students that we have. How do we make sure that they're actually logging on and using the things that we've got? So through our Canvas LMS that we use, we can then go in there and generate reports and see who's been logging in, who's actually, using the material that we're actually putting up. Through Zoom today, I learned that you can actually generate reports to see who the participants are. All of these things, of course, have loopholes in terms of students can just kind of be there and not do anything. But, you're hoping that they are kind of being engaged and things like that. One of the other things within where I work in particular is that we have a learning designer that's dedicated to the Graduate School of Management. What she does is she goes through and really supports us in curriculum development, and she's been pivotal, Lightfoot, it's been pivotal in making sure that we really use the tools that we are trying to use to the best possible way that we can. So it kind of gives you kind of an overview of kind of where we're at in terms of the institution that I'm at. I think each different tertiary institution in New Zealand is grappling with these things in different ways. I'm hearing from my colleagues at other institutions that they're thinking about starting from scratch in terms of teaching requirements and things, and beginning courses later and all that kind of stuff. So every institution is a little bit different, but we're all at the end of the day really trying to make sure that we have that open communication with our students, making sure that we are utilising things to the best possible way that we can, given the short time frame that we've also had. So yeah, I hope that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea.
No, I think that was great, and you hit on a lot of the themes that we're experiencing at our institution, as well as things that were talked about in last week's webinar around the same topic, about clear and consistent communication, about the concerns for student support and student engagement, and about, there are things that are that you just have to scrap in this space, and some decisions that have to be made. Did any of the other panel have anything to tack on to this? Wendy?
Hi, thanks Audrea for that. It was quite interesting, but to contrast that, I guess I'd like to give a little glimpse into what TELedvisors and my own experience in Charles Darwin University, which is pretty much business as usual, but just a bit busier. So from my own work, I support staff teaching online, and all the higher ed units are online anyway, but we are a little bit busier in getting some peripheral groups into the learning management system. And then we've got a really interesting vet pivot online, which Sue Tucker and myself and many others in her team are onto. But that's interesting because it's giving a choice to the teachers whether they would like to take up the existing LMS or Microsoft Teams, or a version sort of blended thereof. So I think one of the extra things that we're looking at, we're always used to doing a plan B as technologists, but we've certainly got the plan Bs really well rounded and worked out. So for example, we have Blackboard Collaborate, which is part of the LMS, so we typically use that. But the organisation has got the license for Zoom, and we've got a couple of other variations to choose from. And things like pre-recorded video is becoming more popular. So we're supporting academics doing that. So from the TELedvisors perspective, I think we are pretty much business as usual, but trying to do a few extra things. So Henk, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much the same for us, except that we're like at QUT we are pretty much a face-to-face institution. And in relation to what Audrea was saying earlier, we yeah, the shift is huge at the moment. I work mostly in a science faculty, and so the immediate need is around getting people used to the most basic tools, you know, because literally most of them have never done anything online. So it's yeah, so we're kind of still pretty much in crisis mode, and then hopefully in the next few weeks that will slowly dissolve into more kind of pedagogical considerations, hopefully.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Henk, about how our crisis mode will flatten out into normal mode and what that will look like. Because I think as TELedvisors, not only part of our job, but perhaps part of our thinking is that there's things that you can do online that you can't do face to face. And if academics experience maybe some benefits apart from being stressed about just connecting with their students, it'll be interesting to see the good bits, whether we can keep the good bits.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to me, and Scott said earlier, talked about the opportunities this creates, and I'm kind of excited about the opportunities it creates. But it does mean that there's a kind of mind shift needed, or that we need to work on, where people recognize the online space as essentially a different space. So and so they get away from the idea of everything that we do offline we need to replicate online. We're trying to shift them to the idea that this is a different space with different opportunities, but also different challenges. Hazel has had her hand up for quite a while.
She's wanted to say something.
I want to say lots, but yeah, no, I think I've got lots of hats on here. I've got my role at the institution, which is learning and teaching consultant, basically curriculum, but I've also got the learning analytics hat on as well. And I think as an institution, we're probably somewhere between what Audrea was talking about and Wendy. We had what we called the first wave, where we were working just on the students who had got isolated in China, and what we did, how we supported those, because we have a large Chinese contingent in a lot of our courses. So that was the early phase, and I think through that we started realising that there was a much bigger wave coming. So I started getting prepared early, and over the last month or so, like others, we've been working 10, 12 hours, working at weekends, supporting our staff to get them ready to move into the fully online version. We went fully online as of last week, so we're sort of over that initial crisis now, and this week of finding we've got just a little bit of breathing time, but in that time just as an example, I did some number crunching because that's where the analytics comes into it. I think it's over 200 courses and course conveners, as they are in our faculties, which is business, that we've moved into fully online mode. We've been running daily training sessions, drop-in sessions on tools like Collaborate, Echo 360, Teams, but also on alternative assessments. And we've had over about 120 different staff members coming to some of those sessions. Some are coming back to multiple sessions. So it's definitely not been business as usual for us, but we're getting there. There's certainly light at the end of the tunnel, and we're now thinking along the lines that Henk was talking about, that for the second half of the year, how can we start bringing some of these pedagogical ideas more to the front for staff and move to a slightly different format of online learning. And I think this is where some of the analytics can help or hinder, as Audrea mentioned briefly, that it's fine to be monitoring student logins, interactions, but staff need to understand what those reports are telling them. They need to be able to access them. We had staff in our institution asking us, where can I find out who's logged in? And we said, well, through Teams, which is one of the things we're using a lot, there isn't any learning analytics that you can gain out of it because Teams wasn't set up as an educational tool, so they haven't quite come along with the analytics. So sometimes we can't get all of that data out yet.
That's really interesting, Hazel.
Yeah.
I just want to make a comment there about Teams. Do you think Microsoft are collecting data in the background and it's just they haven't got a front-end nice sort of analytics thing?
I'm sure they're collecting some of the data at least. I mean, and there's I think we can tell how many people have logged in, but that's about it. And I hope that they are doing it, and if not, I hope that the institutions, and certainly there's ways to feed all of this back, and we're finding that they are quite receptive to ideas when we feed them up to them. So that might be one way that the ASCILITE community can help the institutions, is gather ideas of where there's data or information isn't as readily available, and have conversations with teams from the learning analytics perspective of what institutions would like, so that they can get it right in the first place rather than some of the LMSs that still don't have it right.
Just on that, Hazel, can I ask what are the early indications of student engagement at Griffith? Because we have, I'm asking that because we're kind of only just starting to get our head around this.
Yeah.
And there seem to be very low numbers in, for example, synchronous sessions this week. And we're kind of trying to figure out what that is about. Now, part of it is because the census date is Friday. And so after that, we get probably a bit of a better idea of who's still in units and courses. But yeah.
That's a good point, Henk, about census date.
Yeah, and I think different institutions have gone with different census dates this semester. But in answer to the question, at the moment we've only got anecdotal, but some of our staff are reporting that they're actually very pleased with the numbers, that they're actually getting more to their synchronous online sessions than they were ever getting to their face lectures. So that's a big tick. How long that continues for, I don't know, and how widespread it is, I don't know yet, because again, this is it, that it would be good to have the time to look into that in more detail and find out, but it's in this still, I call it the duck mode, where we're scrambling our feet underneath but trying to keep calm on the top. We haven't had time to look at it in depth. We're lucky that with Echo 360, which we use, there's a lot of data that can be collected from there, so that will be good, and Blackboard has the data, it's just not necessarily that easy to get at. So stay tuned, promising signs.
I think Audrea had something to tack on.
Oh no, I really agreed with the statement that was made about the idea of the new normal. I thought that was a really good way of actually summing it. I think that was Wendy that you mentioned that, and I particularly really liked when you, Hazel, mentioned about the first wave and the second wave. I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but when you said that, that's exactly the way it feels, and I'm now just waiting for the third wave to hit, and I'm just not sure what that's going to entail. Going back, I noticed that Henk, you'd mentioned something about the Zoom securities. Is there something that you've noted? Because we're just starting to use that.
There's just been some discussion, mostly coming from the UK, about issues with Zoom and data security and Zoom sharing data with third parties. I haven't seen any major proof of any of this as yet, but there seems to be
Apparently, they were also
a few issues
subject.
around this.
Sorry, apparently they were also subject to some cyber attacks. I've seen over the last couple of days there's been some news come out about people holding sessions. Yes, Zoom bombing.
Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now the other thing about that is, and I've yet to fact check this, but apparently within Zoom, if you have private chat between two people, when the recording comes out, that's actually recorded.
Oh.
So keep that in mind, because that could get very ugly.
Yeah, it could.
Yes.
Which is why a group of colleagues from various universities are now using WhatsApp, which I noticed coming up. Someone else mentioned that we're using that to have the conversations you wouldn't want anyone else to know you're having. And some of that is sharing some of the fun things that we're finding on the site. But,
which is interesting, Hazel, because obviously in the background the company has the potential to collect all of it. And while it's separate to the work environment, it's just interesting from a data collection perspective. But I agree that it's more of an acknowledgement of what is public and what is private, what is within the teaching sphere, and then still needing to connect to people in other ways.
Yeah. And I think what we've got to remember in all of this for the students, that and this contrasts with what I was saying before about a lot of students we're finding are more engaged, that there are certain students who, as well, who are very much less engaged because they did not choose to be an online student.
Yeah.
And our staff did not choose to be fully online students. So it's different to when it was that we had some online courses and students were choosing to do those. This is being forced on the students. Yeah, and I see everybody's agreeing with that. And so we have to tread a lot more lightly and carefully and provide so much more support. And some of that comes around what Audrea was talking about netiquette rules and things like this. And I find Collaborate very useful because there's a hands up, there's the chat going on as well as the conversation. So, and some of the other software don't have as much of that support alongside it. So we have to, I think at the back of our minds, we have to remember that and all the time be thinking about making it as simple as possible for as many people as possible. And in regards to the learning analytics of that, some people would know that in learning analytics there's the major international organisation called LAC, which is Learning Analytics Knowledge. They went ahead last week and had their conference, which was supposed to be in Frankfurt, in a fully online mode, utilising Zoom. And so there were people from all over the world. But in one of the conversations there, Simon Buckingham-Shum, who I know a lot of people here would at least know that name, made the comment that what we should be measuring at the moment is not what are our students doing, but how are our students doing. And I think when it comes to the analytics and the way that we're teaching at the moment, if we keep that in the back of our mind, that one word shift will change an awful lot of the way that we do things. And that's one of the
Hazel,
big takeaways I've had.
I think you raise a really important point, and again, this came up. It's a recurrent theme through both of the sessions in this series, and it is that how do we support students? So from the panel, and what how are your institutions moving forward in supporting students in making this transition?
Like I said earlier, like we're very much in the early phases of this. It's because at the moment we're basically just trying to support staff as TELedvisors. At the moment, we're just trying to support staff to do what they think they need to do, and so then the student. I mean, of course, the student experience is part of that conversation, and we have a lot of conversation about it. But the idea of providing resources for students to adjust to this new situation is kind of in the very early stages for us.
Yeah. Just going on from what Henk just said, that's exactly what we're doing as well. So at a faculty and at a university level, it's a matter of just keeping those announcements up onto the websites. At a faculty level and within where I work, the Graduate School of Management, it's about sending out those personalised emails to make sure students are okay, to also really make them aware of these are the steps that we're taking, this is what's happening behind the scenes. Some of our students are in programs where they were meant to be going out and doing consultancy work, to let them know that we're trying to find new avenues and new strategies of making this work in the new normal, as you noted before. So it's really about keeping that open communication, and also just for me, for my courses, it's just making sure that students, even before we start, because they're in lockdown, they're not on holidays and in a way that they're able to play around with that software or whatever the technology is that we're going to use and are familiar with it, so it doesn't hit them all at once when we start properly, which is after Easter.
I think another way that the institutions could look at doing some of this support, and I'll take an example from Wollongong, sorry David, because my daughter finished a nursing degree there 12 months ago, and for some reason on Facebook I still get different things. Their Student Nurses Association is, you can imagine that they're in very interesting situation at the moment, because they want to be out doing the crack, they want to be out there helping and things like that. And their student association, through their Facebook site, are sending out awesome updates to the students every day. And David, I don't know whether you can somehow get the message back, but I think Snap are doing an awesome job of trying to keep the information flow to the students and bridge that gap between the students and the staff, to try and protect the staff a little bit as well, because there's a lot of angst, obviously. So I think that's one thing that institutions could look at. In terms of Griffith, we have a page dedicated to student support from the university level that's updated on a quite regular basis. I think a lot of our staff are trying to do the best they can, but they sometimes don't know how to answer it. And I think one of the things is to make sure that all staff are aware of where to send students through, particularly in terms of mental health and wellbeing. So connecting them with the student support areas is awesome. I can see Louise has just said, oh no, that's going back to the evaluation as well. It's just a side conversation, sorry, that I started.
Just in terms of some of the challenges, like I said earlier, I work mostly in a science faculty, and and QUT is also very big on real world learning kind of stuff, which is very much applied, and Sue can probably relate to this too. But in the science faculty, there's a lot of, there's a lot of lab sort of work, field work that is kind of crucial, and it's a very important part of the student experience. So the initial response in our faculty was mostly like, let's just defer this semester. Like, can we just postpone it, please? And so, because there are and now we're kind of, there are of course lots of online options and possibilities around, in terms of simulation, and there's lots of technology out there, but it's very difficult to achieve in the short term. So it's more of a longer term project. So the question then, and the biggest challenge, is how do we deal with this in the short term? Like, we're actually even talking about lifting some practical lab work out of units and moving them to second semester units and potentially shifting some of that around, which in itself is a bit of a logistical nightmare, but it's, yeah.
And Meredith's just brought up a really important one. The big challenge that I think everybody's coming up against is assessment. How do we move some of these? And our biggest bane in business, particularly for people in accounting and finance areas, is the accreditation issues of invigilated, that so much assessment must be invigilated. And yes, some of the professional bodies are relaxing their requirements, but the staff are still in that mental space of, we have to have invigilated exams, and finding ways to do that. If anybody has any solutions for final invigilated exams, I would love to know, because everything we try and are coming up with so far, we're running into hurdles of all sorts of things. And I think, if, again, this may be some way that ASCILITE can come together, is, put out the questions to the community, of what are for people finding best practice in this area, so we're not all reinventing the wheel.
I don't have any solutions to that one, Hazel, but I was hoping that in this panel there would be somebody from Transforming Assessment here. I think they're a fantastic resource as far as the years of webinars of ways of doing assessment differently, but a lot of their solutions are not, easy to get onto in the short term. So to that point, I think we use Respondus, and there's two products there. One is Respondus Lockdown Browser and one is Respondus Monitor. The second product is licensed, controlled license numbers. But I've had a number of conversations about that product, which is integrated into our LMS. It's there and ready to go, but it's not always the best solution, even just doing that kind of invigilation. So it's tricky.
Yeah, I haven't seen, I mean, we've used Proctor.U in the past, but trying to limit it for many reasons that include things like it costs a lot of money. There's a lot of people around the globe using it, so load is going to be an issue. It takes at least 4 weeks to set up properly, and they're now starting to worry about some privacy issues with them as well.
We made the decision yesterday, or the decision was made yesterday, not by me, to not go with Proctor.U. So that was kind of announced yesterday, so to just forget about that, because it's not happening this semester.
I can accept the accreditation argument, and that's real, and that's something we have to deal with. But I would like to do a shout out to Dave Cormier and his Online Learning in a Hurry series, which is a 5-minute video every day on YouTube. And one of those videos was looking at assessment and why we do assessment. It's just really simple things to think about, maybe the assessments we can knock off.
Yep. Could you put a link up for that?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Will do. Yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest.
pass-fail only for this semester. JCU in Australia is one, and certainly in America there's quite a few that have gone that let's just make it easy for everyone and do pass-fail. And yes, that would cause some other issues for high achieving students, but I think it's almost too late for now, but it would have been a good thing to do, I think.
It's something we've instigated here at Auckland. So if a student is doing badly, the worst that they can do is have it not included with their GPA. So yeah.
We're trying to very much move away, or push to move away from exams full stop, really. But yeah, that's a longer term project.
We're coming up on time, so I wanted to throw it open to the participants who are here. Are there things that the panel hasn't actually addressed, or questions that you have?
I just wanted to make a comment that I think this is the first time that we've had SIGs come together in this format well, certainly in the last 3 years that I've been in TELedvisors. And I think that's something that we could do more because there is synergies across, we're all working with computers in education, so that's the commonality, but we're coming at it from different angles. And I think there, maybe there is, whether it's a panel like this, I'm not sure what form, but I definitely think that co-working, TELedvisors have talked to digital equity, SIG before, and we've tried to get something up and running, but it didn't necessarily work at that time. But I think that we could work together more to provide a rich feedback to the community of ASCILITE.
Yep.
Thanks for that, Wendy.
Yeah, I'm definitely on my agenda to try and facilitate that, and this was the start of it. And as we've gone through the day, I'm thinking that we need more of these panels in the lead up to the second half of the year as well, to come back together, and hopefully with more people with ideas of what have, now we've had time to think for a week or two and moving forward, what are we going to do for the second half of the year? So if people think that's a good idea, we can certainly work on that.
I think it's a great idea. I think we have a lot of expertise in these different SIGs that, like Wendy said, have a lot of overlap and can feed off each other a lot more than what we probably have done so far.
And I think it doesn't need to be necessarily designed. It can be, let's just bring these 3 SIGs together. And of course, you're going to have a conversation about a particular thing, but as we move forward, we need to find the synergies. And so we can't necessarily preempt that, but I think we can get together and find those synergies and then be able to move them forward.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest advantages of having such a large group of, having ASCILITE as such a large kind of community of practice as such, because there's so much and so varied expertise, that we can draw on and bring back to individual institutions.
So we just I think that's great, and we'll take that on board and look at potentially working in something into the future. Just getting to the questions, somebody asked the question about how are organizations managing Zoom licenses, and I don't know, is any of the panel across that, or anybody else in the room want to speak to that? I can tell you what I know of what we're doing at UOW.
I know we have one, and it's just been increased from a certain amount of users to corporate-wide, but I don't have the back-end details of that.
We have one as well. We've had one for quite a while. I don't have the exact details except to say that it started to fall over a bit in the middle of the week last week, and then they increased the capacity. So I don't really know if that was if that was just for QUT or if that was a wider global thing.
Yeah. Just in terms of my institution, we've all, as academics, got a Zoom Pro account now that we've been assigned, which has been really, really helpful, but I wouldn't know the exact numbers or anything offhand.
We used to have, we're changing the inbuilt automatic recording of Zoom sessions to save space in the cloud, I think. So now you have to actually do what you do in Collaborate, which is to manually record if you want to record.
I think that's interesting, Henk, because it's acknowledging that it's probably being used for different things. So there's a lot of Zoom that is being used to just connect people together that doesn't need to be recorded later.
Picking up on Scott's question there about internships, practicals, placements and things like that, I think it's a mixed bag, particularly in our area, in the business area. It's a matter of talking to industry partners as to whether they still have the capacity to take students, and if they're not, then we're looking at project-based. And one of the things that I thought was an interesting way to go about this was find projects for the students within the university, because if the university can't find interesting projects for business students at the moment with everything that's going on, and it would be the same for a lot of different areas, then we're not thinking laterally enough.
I think I actually made that statement probably a little offhand to an academic the other day, who was so stuck on what they do in the face-to-face classroom and how it wouldn't work online. And I did sort of say, well, you're not being creative enough. But
How did that go down, David?
Believe it, I was actually surprised. I realized after it flew out of my mouth that it probably wasn't the thing to say. But it is that sort of getting in that mindset of instead of saying but, saying and. I don't know if you're familiar with this exercise, how it reframes what it is that you're trying to do. But this is a particular academic that is big into the saying but. Pretty much any recommendation you give. And it was just trying to say, you know what, let's look at this differently. And it actually surprisingly led to a productive discussion, but yeah, it was one of those things that I was even a little shocked that I said it.
And I think that moving into the second half of the year, that's the sort of conversations we've got to have with our academics to push the bounds, because there are some institutions that have been doing online learning for a long while and are very versed, and students are going to vote with their feet. And if all of our institutions want to survive and thrive, they're definitely going to have to start that creative thinking. But I think if I'd have asked someone like in our area that question at the moment, something would have been thrown at me, because it's probably a little bit too early for most people to get there. But yes, I think that's where we've got to start pushing out.
And I think that's another question to open up to folks is how, given where everyone is at headspace wise, capacity wise, at what point do we think is the good time to actually start saying, okay, this has been the hurry up bit, but we do have a little bit of lead time coming into the second half of the year. And what's everyone's feeling about when we start having those discussions, saying, okay, let's start thinking about this now. We've got some lead time. Forearmed is forewarned. you know, to start having those discussions?
It's a really difficult question, David, because it depends on. I mean, as you were saying that, I was thinking, well, immediately kind of start planning and probably think about it on a program level. But then at the same time, I'm thinking maybe we should just do a few pilot projects with willing academics who feel in the right headspace. Because there are a lot of people that are, like as you say, are currently in crisis mode, and I'm not sure how fast they will come out of crisis mode. And when you talk to them in crisis mode, they're definitely not creative.
Yeah, so we're certainly planning for post-Easter, which really is only a week away, because our VC has very kindly given us all an extra day's holiday next Thursday, which was specifically to say thank you and take a breather. So that's where we're heading. But if Pauline's saying that some universities aren't even going to fully online next week, so they're not going to be ready for a while after that. So you can all learn from our mistakes.
But we had a bit of a conversation earlier in the chat as well about evaluation, and I think that's kind of a crucial element to this as well, you know, because yeah, we have ditched student evaluations, or the ones that we were planning for this semester, but we are kind of starting to look at ways of evaluating what we're doing online, and so out of that that should kind of inform what we do in the next semester as well, I believe.
Agreed. And I guess one final question to the panel, or to actually anyone who's in the discussion. In terms of that diffusion of practice, and that you know, because there's going to be, I would say, a significant amount of learning that's going to happen. Are institutions adopting strategies or ways to bring those small wins and innovative practices back into the discussion?
I don't know that I'm seeing it at institution level where we are yet, but certainly at our equivalent of faculty level, we're trying to capture as much as we can. We have, I think it's, Kinley, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 or 3 different teams where we're asking staff to come together, and one of the things that we're finding is the academics supporting other academics.
Yeah.
As well, we're putting it up on the team space and things like that, and sharing practice, and we're getting and making that a fun space too, which I think is important for both staff and students moving forward. So at faculty level, yes. At institution level, I don't know that we're there. At the ground roots level, it may be happening more at a higher level, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I have to agree with Hazel. I'm not seeing it so much at a higher level at the moment, but in saying that, we've only been back since Monday, as that's when we started our online, so it's very early days. However, at more lower level faculty and within departments, we have community of practices where we are very much sharing and shoulder to shoulder in terms of academics, saying this is what's working for me, because we've got staff that are in semesters as well as staff that are in the quarters as well. So it's nice that we've got a kind of a week before we hit the ground, and they'll have had about 10 days or more with the students. So, yeah.
In our existing structure, we have something that we've called innovation flags, which means that lecturers who are doing something that they believe is innovative, they can apply for these, and then that protects them from negative student feedback in the first instance.
Yeah.
And so that's a kind of way of experimenting, I suppose, or doing something that students might not immediately like because it's unusual. And so we're kind of probably will use that system to to apply to the current situation as well.
That's
really like that
that's
idea.
great. So I think we're almost at time, so we've come to the end of this. On behalf of ASCILITE and everyone attending the webinar, thank you. And thank you to our panel today for sharing with us. We hope you found this the session useful. And please check out the website as we will advertise any upcoming webinars there. So thank you very much, and thank you to the panel.
Thanks, David.
Thanks all.
David.
Thanks,
Yeah, thanks for
everyone.
having us all.